There are countless messages, videos, opinions, and voices competing for your attention every single day. Most people scroll through them without a second thought. They move from one thing to another, never stopping long enough to consider whether a particular message might have been placed in front of them for a reason. Yet every now and then something appears at exactly the right moment. It captures your attention in a way that feels different. It speaks directly to questions you've been asking, struggles you've been facing, or thoughts you've been carrying in silence. This may be one of those moments. You might think finding this message was an accident. You might assume it was simply another video among thousands of others. But what if it is more than that? What if God is using this moment to get your attention because there is something important you need to hear before the next chapter of your life begins? One of the most fascinating things about God's timing is that it rarely feels dramatic when it first happens. We often expect divine moments to arrive with obvious signs and unmistakable certainty. We imagine that if God wants to speak to us, it will happen in a way that leaves no room for doubt. Yet, throughout life, God often works through ordinary moments that carry extraordinary significance. A conversation, a thought, a message, a chance encounter, a sudden realization. At first, these moments can appear completely ordinary. But later, when we look back, we realize they marked the beginning of something much greater. Think about your own life for a moment. There have likely been times when something seemingly small changed the direction of your future. A single conversation introduced you to an important opportunity. A simple piece of advice helped you avoid a major mistake. A message arrived at exactly the moment you needed encouragement. What looked insignificant at the time later proved to be incredibly important. This is how God often works. He understands where you are right now. He knows the questions you have been carrying. He knows the burdens you have been trying to manage. He knows the prayers you have spoken and the ones you have only whispered in your heart. Nothing about your current season is hidden from him. That is why you should not dismiss the possibility that this message has arrived at the perfect time. Perhaps you have been feeling discouraged lately. Maybe you've been wondering why progress has been so slow. Maybe you've been questioning whether your efforts are making any difference. Perhaps you've reached a point where frustration has started replacing hope. If so, you are not alone. Many chosen ones go through seasons where they struggle to understand what God is doing. They see delays instead of progress. They see obstacles instead of opportunities. They see uncertainty instead of direction. But one of the reasons God sends reminders during these seasons is because perspective matters. When people focus only on their current circumstances, they often miss the larger picture. They become so consumed by what is happening today that they fail to recognize what God may be preparing for tomorrow. This is why timing is important. There are messages that would mean very little to you 6 months earlier. There are lessons that would not make sense a year before. There are truths that can only be understood after certain experiences have shaped you. The fact that you are hearing this now may not be random at all. It may be connected to where you are in your journey. God often speaks to people when they are standing near important transitions, not because everything is about to change overnight, but because they need encouragement, clarity, and perspective before taking the next step. The next season of your life may require greater faith than the previous one. It may require new decisions. It may require letting go of old fears. It may require seeing yourself differently than you have before. And before those changes happen, God often prepares the heart. That preparation begins by getting your attention. The truth is that most people will scroll past moments that could change their lives. They will dismiss opportunities because they appear ordinary. They will ignore guidance because it does not arrive in the form they expected. They will overlook important messages because they are distracted by temporary concerns. But you have a choice. You can treat this as just another passing moment, or you can pause long enough to consider that God may be speaking to you through it. Not because you are perfect, not because you have all the answers, but because God knows exactly where you are, exactly what you need, and exactly what He is preparing you for. Sometimes the biggest changes begin with a single moment of attention, a single realization, a single decision, a single message that arrives at exactly the right time. And perhaps that is why this message found you today. Because God is trying to show you that this moment is not random. It is arriving precisely when you need it most. As you begin to understand that this message has arrived at the right time, there is another truth that God wants you to see. For too long, you may have been looking at your life through the lens of your current circumstances instead of through the lens of God's greater plan. You have been focused on individual struggles, isolated disappointments, and temporary setbacks without realizing that they are all part of a much larger picture. This happens to many chosen ones. When people are walking through difficult seasons, they naturally focus on what is directly in front of them. They focus on the bill that needs to be paid, the opportunity that did not work out, the relationship that ended, the prayer that seems unanswered, or the door that remains closed. These challenges are real and they deserve attention, but when they become the only thing you see, they can prevent you from recognizing what God is doing behind the scenes. Imagine looking at a massive painting from only a few inches away. All you would see are individual brushstrokes. Some colors might seem out of place, some shapes might appear confusing. Nothing would make sense because you are too close to see the entire image. Life often feels the same way. When you focus only on today's problem, you cannot always see tomorrow's purpose. When you focus only on the current struggle, you cannot always see the future lesson. When you focus only on the closed door, you cannot always see the better door being prepared elsewhere. This is why God is asking you to step back and see the bigger picture. The truth is that many of the things you viewed as obstacles were actually forms of preparation. The delays you complained about were often protecting you from moving too quickly. The disappointments you experienced were often redirecting you toward something better. The seasons of uncertainty were often teaching lessons that would become valuable later. At the time, none of this was obvious. When you were facing rejection, it felt painful. When you were experiencing delay, it felt frustrating. When plans fell apart, it felt discouraging. But now, as you look back, you may begin noticing patterns that were invisible before. Perhaps there were opportunities you desperately wanted that would have taken you away from your purpose. Perhaps there were relationships you fought to keep that would have limited your growth. Perhaps there were paths you wanted to pursue that would have led to unnecessary struggles. What seemed like loss was often protection. What seemed like failure was often redirection. What seemed like an ending was often preparation for a new beginning. This is one of the reasons faith is so important. Faith allows you to trust that God sees what you cannot see. It reminds you that your perspective is limited while His perspective is complete. He sees not only where you are, but also where you are going. He sees connections, opportunities, and outcomes long before they become visible to you. Many chosen ones spend years asking, "Why is this happening to me?" But eventually the question changes. Instead of asking why, they begin asking what. What is God teaching me through this? What strength is being developed? What lesson am I learning? What preparation is taking place? The moment that shift happens, everything begins to look different. Suddenly, challenges become opportunities for growth. Delays become opportunities for preparation. Difficulties become opportunities for strengthening faith. And setbacks become opportunities for redirection. This does not mean every struggle becomes enjoyable. It does not mean pain instantly disappears, but it does mean that struggles no longer appear meaningless. One of the greatest mistakes people make is assuming that God's plan can only be seen while it is happening. In reality, His plan often becomes clearer when you look backward. You begin connecting experiences that once seemed unrelated. You start noticing how one event prepared you for another. You realize that certain lessons arrived exactly when they were needed. The bigger picture starts coming into focus, and when it does, you recognize something remarkable. You were never as lost as you thought. You were never forgotten. You were never abandoned. You were never moving without direction. Even during seasons when everything seemed uncertain, God was guiding your steps. That is why this moment matters. God is inviting you to stop measuring your future by your current circumstances. He is asking you to look beyond today's challenges and recognize that something larger is unfolding. The story is not finished. The chapter you are currently living is not the final chapter. There is more ahead. There is more purpose ahead. There is more growth ahead. There are more opportunities ahead. And many of the experiences that once confused you are beginning to reveal their true purpose. Because what you thought were isolated struggles were actually pieces of a much greater plan that God has been unfolding all along. Now that you are beginning to see the bigger picture behind your struggles, there is another truth God wants you to understand. What you have been praying for, hoping for, and waiting for may be much closer than you think. For so long, it may have felt like nothing was changing. The same challenges kept appearing, the same delays continued, the same unanswered questions remained. Yet beneath the surface, movement has been taking place, even when you could not see it. This is often how God works. Many people expect major changes to announce themselves loudly. They imagine that breakthrough arrives with immediate certainty and obvious signs. They assume that when a new season begins, everything changes overnight. But in reality, significant shifts often begin quietly. Before they become visible, they are developing behind the scenes. Think about sunrise for a moment. The darkest part of the night can make it seem as though morning will never come. Everything appears unchanged. Everything looks the same, yet even while darkness remains, the sun is already moving toward the horizon. The new day is approaching long before anyone can see it. Your life may be in a similar season right now. You may be measuring your future by what you see today. You may be judging your progress by current circumstances. You may be assuming that because everything looks the same, nothing is changing. But God is saying that a major shift is closer than you realize. One of the reasons chosen ones struggle during transition seasons is because they become accustomed to waiting. After experiencing delays for so long, they begin expecting more delays. After facing disappointment repeatedly, they begin expecting more disappointment. Their minds become conditioned to anticipate obstacles rather than opportunities. This is understandable, but it can also be dangerous. When people expect delay, they sometimes fail to recognize movement. When people expect disappointment, they sometimes overlook opportunity. When people become focused on past struggles, they can miss signs of future breakthrough. That is why God is asking you to remain alert. The season ahead may not arrive the way you expect. It may begin with a conversation. It may begin with an idea. It may begin with a connection. It may begin with a door that suddenly opens after years of remaining closed. At first, the change may appear small. It may not immediately look like the breakthrough you have been praying for. But many of the greatest transformations begin with seemingly ordinary moments. A single opportunity can change the direction of a career. A single decision can alter the course of a future. A single relationship can open doors that once seemed impossible to reach. A single step of faith can begin a completely new chapter. This is why timing matters. What felt impossible last year may become possible now. What was unavailable before may suddenly appear. What was delayed may finally move forward. Not because circumstances magically changed overnight, but because the preparation process has been reaching completion. For a long time, God has been working on things you could not see. He has been preparing opportunities. He has been arranging connections. He has been developing your character. He has been teaching lessons that will soon become valuable. Everything has been moving toward a specific moment. Many chosen ones assume breakthrough is something they must force through effort alone. They believe that if they work harder, worry more, or push longer, they can make things happen faster. But God's timing cannot be rushed. Certain opportunities only arrive when the season is right. Certain doors only open when preparation is complete. That is why patience was necessary. That is why growth was necessary. That is why the waiting season had value. Without those experiences, you might not have been ready for what is coming next. Now, however, something feels different. Perhaps you have noticed it already. There is a growing sense that change is approaching. There is a feeling that movement is happening. There is an awareness that the chapter you have been living may not last much longer. Many people ignore these moments because they continue focusing on what has not happened yet. They remain trapped in old expectations and old disappointments. But God is asking you to look forward rather than backward. Do not assume tomorrow will look exactly like yesterday. Do not assume the future will repeat the past. Do not assume closed doors will remain closed forever. The God who guided you through preparation is fully capable of leading you into breakthrough. The God who carried you through delay is fully capable of bringing acceleration. The God who sustained you during difficult seasons is fully capable of opening doors that no one else can open. This is why hope matters right now, not wishful thinking, not blind optimism, but genuine expectation that God is still working, even when you cannot yet see the full picture. Because what feels distant may actually be near. What feels delayed may actually be arriving. What seems impossible may actually be preparing to unfold. And the major shift you have been praying for could be much closer than you think. As you begin to realize that a major shift may be closer than you think, there is something else God wants you to understand. One of the greatest reasons people miss life-changing opportunities is not because the opportunities never appear. It is because distractions prevent them from recognizing those opportunities when they arrive. This has always been one of the enemy's most effective strategies. If he cannot stop your purpose, he will try to distract you from it. If he cannot prevent your breakthrough, he will try to keep your attention focused on everything except the breakthrough. If he cannot close the door God is opening, he will try to make sure you never notice the door. That is why spiritual alertness matters so much during seasons of transition. Many people spend their lives reacting to whatever demands their attention in the moment. They become consumed by temporary problems, daily frustrations, and endless distractions. Their focus shifts from one concern to another until they no longer have the clarity needed to recognize what truly matters. The modern world makes this challenge even greater. Every day, countless voices compete for attention. Endless information fills the mind. Constant noise creates confusion. Temporary concerns begin to feel more important than eternal truths. Without realizing it, people become so distracted that they lose sight of where God is leading them. This is exactly why the title of this message is so important. Most people will scroll past. Most people will keep moving. Most people will never stop long enough to consider that God may be trying to show them something important. They will be too busy, too distracted, too discouraged, too focused on immediate problems. As a result, they will overlook moments that could have changed the direction of their lives. Chosen ones cannot afford to live that way. God is calling you to a higher level of awareness. He is asking you to pay attention not only to what is happening around you, but also to what is happening within you. Pay attention to the ideas that continue returning. Pay attention to the opportunities that repeatedly appear. Pay attention to the convictions that refuse to disappear. Pay attention to the doors that continue opening despite obstacles. These things often carry significance. One reason distractions are so dangerous is because they rarely appear harmful at first. In fact, many distractions seem completely reasonable. They present themselves as worries, frustrations, comparisons, and concerns. You become focused on what someone else is doing. You become consumed by past mistakes. You become discouraged by temporary setbacks. You become trapped in cycles of overthinking. Before long, your energy is invested in things that have little connection to your future. Meanwhile, opportunities pass by unnoticed. This is why God often calls his people to be still and listen. Not because inactivity is the goal, but because clarity becomes difficult when the mind is constantly overwhelmed. When everything is competing for attention, it becomes harder to recognize God's direction. When fear, anxiety, and distraction dominate your thoughts, discernment becomes weaker. When your focus is scattered, your ability to recognize opportunity decreases. That is why this season requires intentional focus. You cannot control every circumstance around you, but you can control what receives your attention. You can choose whether to dwell on problems or possibilities. You can choose whether to focus on fear or faith. You can choose whether to remain trapped in old disappointments or stay open to new opportunities. These choices matter more than many people realize. Throughout history, some of the greatest opportunities appeared during ordinary moments. The people who recognized them were not necessarily more talented than everyone else. They were simply paying attention. They noticed what others ignored. They listened when others were distracted. They responded when others hesitated. As a result, they stepped into opportunities that changed everything. The same principle applies today. God may already be placing signs, opportunities, and guidance in your path. The question is whether you are paying attention. Many chosen ones spend years praying for answers while overlooking the answers that are already appearing. They ask God to speak, yet ignore the lessons he is teaching. They pray for opportunity, yet dismiss the opportunities that arrive in unexpected forms. Do not let that happen to you. The shift approaching your life may require a different level of focus than you have maintained in previous seasons. It may require letting go of distractions that no longer serve your purpose. It may require limiting influences that create confusion. It may require becoming more intentional about where you invest your time, energy, and attention, because your attention is valuable. What you focus on grows. What you consistently think about shapes your decisions. What receives your attention eventually influences your future. This is why God is calling you to remain spiritually alert, not fearful, not anxious, not obsessed with trying to control every detail. Simply aware that God is moving, aware that opportunities are appearing, aware that this season is different, aware that your breakthrough may arrive in a form you do not expect. Most people will scroll past moments that could change their lives because they are distracted by things that ultimately do not matter. But God is calling you to stay attentive, stay focused, and stay spiritually awake so that you do not miss what He is placing directly in front of you. As you remain spiritually alert and refuse to let distractions pull you away from what God is doing, there is another challenge you must be prepared for. It is the challenge that often appears right before a breakthrough. It is the challenge that has stopped countless people from stepping into the future they were meant to experience. That challenge is fear. Fear is powerful because it rarely announces itself honestly. It does not usually say, "I want to stop your progress." Instead, it disguises itself as caution. It disguises itself as doubt. It disguises itself as overthinking. It disguises itself as the need for more certainty. Before long, the person who was once excited about the future becomes hesitant, uncertain, and unwilling to move forward. This is why God repeatedly tells His people not to fear, not because fear will never appear, but because He knows how destructive it can become when it controls decisions. The reality is that every significant step of faith involves uncertainty. If you could see every detail of the future, faith would not be necessary. If every answer were already available, trust would not be required. If every outcome were guaranteed, courage would have no purpose. Yet God often asks people to move before they can see the entire path. This can feel uncomfortable. You may be standing at the edge of a new opportunity right now. Perhaps God is encouraging you to pursue something you have never attempted before. Perhaps He is calling you to leave behind an old season that has become familiar. Perhaps He is opening a door that seems larger than your experience. Whatever form it takes, fear will likely try to convince you that you are not ready. It will remind you of every past mistake. It will replay every previous disappointment. It will magnify every weakness. It will focus your attention on everything that could go wrong. Fear always wants you to believe that staying where you are is safer than moving forward. But there is something important you must remember. The same fear that is speaking to you today spoke to you during previous seasons as well. It told you that you would not survive certain challenges. It told you that you would never recover from certain disappointments. It told you that some obstacles were too great to overcome. Yet here you are. You survived what fear said would destroy you. You overcame what fear said was impossible. You continued moving forward despite what fear predicted. That means fear has already been wrong about you many times before. One of the greatest mistakes people make is assuming that courage means feeling completely confident. They imagine that courageous people never experience doubt or uncertainty. But true courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is choosing faith even while fear is present. It is taking the step anyway. It is trusting God anyway. It is moving forward anyway. Every person who has ever achieved something meaningful has faced moments when fear tried to stop them. The difference is that they refused to let fear make their decisions. They understood something important. The future God has prepared cannot be reached by remaining trapped in yesterday's mindset. Growth requires movement. Purpose requires movement. Opportunity requires movement. Faith requires movement. This is why the season ahead may demand a different response than the seasons behind you. In the past, your assignment may have been to wait. Your assignment may have been to learn. Your assignment may have been to heal, grow, and prepare. But now God may be asking you to act, and action often feels uncomfortable because it requires trusting Him beyond what you can currently see. Many chosen ones spend years praying for open doors. Then, when those doors finally appear, they hesitate because the opportunity feels bigger than expected. They wonder if they are qualified enough. They wonder if they have enough experience. They wonder if they are capable of handling the responsibility. What they fail to realize is that God would not have spent years preparing them if He intended for them to remain where they are. Every lesson had a purpose. Every delay had a purpose. Every challenge had a purpose. The strength you developed was not meant to sit unused. The wisdom you gained was not meant to remain hidden. The faith you built was not meant to stay untested. All of it was preparing you for moments like this, moments when fear says stop but faith says move, moments when uncertainty says wait but purpose says go, moments when doubt says you cannot do it but God says you can. This is where trust becomes essential. Trust does not mean you understand everything. Trust does not mean you have every answer. Trust simply means believing that God is faithful enough to guide the next step, and often that next step is all you need. You do not need the entire map. You do not need complete certainty. You do not need every detail revealed in advance. You only need enough faith to take the step God is placing in front of you today. Because many people will miss their moment by listening to fear. But those who choose faith discover that God was already preparing the way long before they ever began moving forward. As you learn to choose faith over fear, there is one final truth that God wants you to understand. This may be the most important truth of all because it determines what happens next. The opportunities, lessons, warnings, encouragement, and guidance you have received mean very little if they never lead to action. At some point, every person arrives at a moment where a decision must be made, and that decision has the power to change everything. Many people spend their lives waiting for the perfect moment. They wait until they feel completely confident. They wait until every question has been answered. They wait until every risk has disappeared. They wait until certainty replaces uncertainty. The problem is that those conditions rarely exist. Life moves forward through decisions. Purpose unfolds through decisions. Growth happens through decisions. Destiny is often shaped by decisions. This is why today's choices matter more than most people realize. When people look back over their lives, they often discover that major turning points were connected to seemingly small decisions. A conversation they chose to have, an opportunity they chose to pursue, a lesson they chose to apply, a risk they chose to take, a step of faith they chose to make. At the time, those decisions appeared ordinary. Later, they realized those moments changed everything. This is one reason God repeatedly speaks about obedience. Obedience is not merely hearing truth, it is responding to truth. It is taking what God reveals and allowing it to influence your actions. Many people hear wisdom but never apply it. They receive guidance but never act on it. They recognize opportunities but never pursue them. As a result, their lives remain unchanged even though the answers they needed were already available. Knowledge alone does not create transformation. Action creates transformation. You may have spent years asking God for direction. Perhaps you prayed for clarity. Perhaps you asked Him to reveal your next step. Perhaps you wanted confirmation that you were moving in the right direction. But what if the next step has already been shown to you? What if God has already been providing clues through your experiences, lessons, opportunities, and convictions? What if the issue is no longer about receiving more information, but about responding to the information you already have? That is a question every chosen one must eventually answer, because there comes a point where preparation gives way to action. There comes a point where learning gives way to application. There comes a point where waiting gives way to movement. This does not mean making reckless decisions. It does not mean acting impulsively. Wisdom still matters. Discernment still matters. Prayer still matters. But there is a difference between thoughtful preparation and endless hesitation. One prepares you for the future, the other keeps you from entering it. Many people remain stuck because they keep postponing decisions that God is asking them to make today. They tell themselves they will act tomorrow. They promise they will move forward later. They convince themselves that another sign is necessary. Meanwhile, opportunities pass, doors close, seasons change, and the moment that once carried potential slowly fades away. God does not want that for you. That is why this message is not simply about encouragement. It is about response. What will you do with what you have learned? What will you do with the lessons from your past? What will you do with the opportunities appearing before you? What will you do with the faith God has been developing within you? Your answers to those questions matter. Because the future is built one decision at a time. The person you become tomorrow is shaped by the choices you make today. The opportunities you experience tomorrow are often connected to the actions you take today. The growth you desire tomorrow depends on what you are willing to do today. This is why God places such importance on the present moment. You cannot change yesterday. You cannot control every detail of tomorrow. But you can choose how you respond today. You can choose faith instead of fear. You can choose focus instead of distraction. You can choose trust instead of doubt. You can choose action instead of hesitation. These choices may seem small in the moment, but they carry enormous power. A single decision can begin a new chapter. A single act of obedience can open a new door. A single step of faith can lead to opportunities you never imagined. That is how transformation often begins, not with dramatic announcements, not with instant perfection, but with one decision to move in the direction God is leading. And perhaps that is why this message found you today, because God knows that you are standing at a moment of decision, a moment where old thinking can be left behind, a moment where fear can lose its influence, a moment where faith can become action, a moment where the choices you make today can shape the direction of your future. Because while most people will scroll past and move on, those who listen, believe, and respond are often the ones who discover that a single decision can truly change everything.